When they were married, my parents always declared they would be child-free. Relatives have informed me I was conceived quite by accident. I had a nice existence at first, but I believe my parents wanted less time with me as I stopped being a cute small child. Both of them worked and finally teamed up to launch a company. They breathed and lived that business. I always felt second to it. Like my grandparents, the rest of my family lived in other states, and until I was an adult, I didn't really know anything about them. Growing up then, I had no other family nearby. TV and my teachers reared me, basically. I used to frequently not even celebrate my birthday with my parents before turning 13. They would merely instruct me to go buy anything I wanted and hand me money. For Christmas, and occasionally even back-to-school shopping, it was essentially the same. Once I turned 10, I convinced my parents to purchase a faux Christmas tree that I could display and remove annually. We wouldn't have had a tree at all without it. If I were to characterize my parents, they would be those folks who frown at other people, drink a lot of wine, and always wear black. Though my dad now wears a toupee, my parents looked and behaved essentially the same the last time I visited them. Turning 16, I asked my parents if I may work part-time at their company. They informed me they had nothing like that there were no open jobs. They could have straightforwardly told me they didn't want me there. My parents warned me I was an adult and should move out as soon as I reached 18. While in high school, I worked part-time, yet I didn't have nearly enough saved for college. Not long after I graduated from high school, they formally advised me to go, offering me 30 days and everything. They didn't even assist me with relocation. I had to rely on the truck-owning friend's dad. I finally settled into a terrible apartment and started working retail. I had neither time for college nor any actual skills. After just a few months, I was let go since my manager truly disliked me and gave me poor performance ratings for the smallest of offenses. Not even do I recall what they were anymore. Still, the boss treated me poorly only once. I phoned corporate along with a few others to discuss it. After corporate investigated, the manager was shortly let go for several different reasons. Since it was primarily kept private, I know few of them, but someone told me that stealing smokes was part of it. The manager smoked extensively as well. Corporate wouldn't hire me back, but they changed the record to indicate I was laid off instead of fired. Therefore, my resume would still look fine, I suppose. They have to have assumed I was something or damaged goods. I was horrible with handling my money and couldn't find consistent employment. Hence, for whatever reason, I rapidly lost all of it. I went missing. Not even temporarily to get back on my feet. My parents wouldn't let me in when I returned to ask for aid. I lost my work and ended up winter camping in a tent in someone else's garden. Every buddy of mine had left for college, some in other states. I, on the other hand, was broke and working any odd job I could locate to cover expenses. When my parents discovered I was living in a tent, someone who lived next door to them volunteered to take me in for a little period so I wouldn't freeze. She nagged my parents till at last they provided me with contact details for my extended family. Maybe terrified of being criticized for how they had thrown out their own son, they did not want to tell me. But they provided me with the information, a list of names and means of contact. They then advised me not to trouble them ever again, having not seen me since I was a baby. Friends and relatives from Dad's side were startled and happy to hear from me. Their only grandchild is me. My grandparents flew me straight away to live with them when they learned what was happening. They essentially took up my mantle. My parents were invited, but they never even picked me up at the airport. I hardly spoke with them for almost 10 years. Writing my parents out of their wills, my grandparents said they legally rejected them for how badly they handled me. Those who knew my parents claimed they hated hearing it, but they also stated it didn't matter since they were wealthy and had nothing to require from my grandparents. That proved to be rather erroneous. I had enough saved by the time I turned 21 to begin attending community college. I graduated with an associate's degree, and my grandfather helped me land a decent job. Eventually, my grandparents volunteered to sell me their house so they might retire to Arizona. Grandma wanted to move to a warmer location as every year the cold was aggravating her condition. Seeing them leaving depressed me, but I was happy to buy the house. It will be paid off in a few more years. They handed it to me for a third of its cost. My job requires me to travel occasionally on the road. I might thus not be able to return home for weeks in succession. Still, this doesn't really trouble me. I have neither a lover, a pet, nor anything else like that. Right now I have no time for them. I will, however, schedule time in a few years when I have some things under control. I refuse to spend eternity alone. Then, comma. In late 2020, I returned home from more than 2 weeks away to see an unfamiliar white vehicle in my yard. Just as I was ready to call the police, I saw that the side of the van bore my parents' business emblem. I worried. She was there. Now, living in my place, they had somehow found themselves. And as soon as I went in, they treated me as if we were old friends. They never left. Though I told them it wasn't Grandma and Grandpa's house anymore, they claimed it was. They sold it to me once they grew elderly. Knowing anything about my life, they would have known that. But without life experience, they cast me out 10 years ago like a stray dog. They wouldn't go. We got into a fight. First I learned about was my dad's folks. Stated differently, should he and my mother be interested, they could live there. I headed immediately to my bedroom, shut the door, and then called the police. When the cops arrived, they were useless. Actually, my parents lied to them when they claimed to have been there long enough to establish residency, but there were no cameras proving they hadn't been there for a month. My neighbors also lacked cameras. They claimed their rights as squatters, hence it was my word against theirs on their actual length of presence. They told the cops I was trying to evict them for no reason and that I had a verbal lease with them. When Mom stated that, she even started crying. The cops informed me it was a family dispute and advised me to proceed with court eviction of them. 2020 saw this happening. The epidemic made everything take more time to reach the court. My parents were taunting me and residing in my house without paying rent in the meantime. From what they told me, their company had collapsed, and they sold practically all they possessed to pay off their debt. They had just the van and some personal belongings. Stated differently, they felt they could temporarily reside in my house for free. They needed to work as well. Both of them started fresh careers rapidly. Mom was in sales while my dad was a delivery driver. They were becoming profitable. They basically handed me a $100 note every month and advised me to be appreciative since the only items they paid for were the water and electricity. The only time they would discuss rent was when I mentioned their 18 years of life and their free living owed to them. Besides, at that time they were not requesting the money back off. They then declared they would not be helping with the costs. So stressed out was I that I phoned my grandparents to let them know what was happening. They gave my parents an earful on their extreme displeasure. Still, it mattered nothing. They declared they wouldn't move and could stay in my house nevertheless. Grandpa admitted he was sorry this had happened, and that without his selling me the house, my folks wouldn't have moved in. I urged him not to worry about it. I would soon get it. I had already applied with the court to have them expelled, and my parents realized they had not much time left. I checked to be sure my folks could hear me say that. Their response was silence. Dad drove a delivery truck 6 days a week, a job he did not particularly enjoy, hence, he was away most of the time. And my mother wanted to take over my house when she had free time. She made me rearrange my living room and even try to assign the master bedroom to my dad and her after telling me my parents were my parents and deserved more. Though I told them I didn't deserve better and to stop it, they tried to make me feel as though I owed them anything. I did not request birth. Parents also have obligations toward raising their own children. All they were doing was trying to establish control so I wouldn't have them kicked out. 4 months ago, early 2021, was the last time I brought my parents before court. They were squatters, hence, I took action. They battled the eviction and tried to fool me into backing down, hence, we just had to go to court. Saying it used to be my grandparents' house, and they were paying me $100 a month, they tried to get me to cave, but there was not a leasing agreement. They realized they wouldn't be honest trying to create a phony 1. Since they had no right to be in my house, the judge instructed them they had to depart within 30 days at the latest. They informed me they were offended that I had kicked out my own flesh and blood when they met me following court. I laughed and called them liars, since they seemed as though they didn't give my welfare any thought. I loved them neither, since they didn't love me. I owed nothing to them. They want to seize what I owned. They had never truly behaved like they should have, hence they did not merit being named my parents. I told them to mind their own business, sneered at them, and told them they were lying narcissists, knowing that I would contact the cops should they not vacate my residence after 30 days, which motivated them. Dad seemed enraged. He wanted to say or do something, but my mom shook her head and grabbed his shoulder to stop him. He left, glaring at me. They left, certainly, but not without much drama. They either ignored me entirely or guilt-tripped me to try to change my decision over that last month. I annotated every day they had left on the living room calendar with a red marker. A large red circle indicated their precise day of departure. I still recall the last day was March 2, entitledpeople. My parents did not finally do till the day they had to leave my house permanently. They had to clear the house of all their belongings even then and spend a few days sleeping on the guest room floor. These folks hardly looked for an apartment until after the court-ordered eviction. They were so sure they could get me to let them stay. It also required weeks of diligence on behalf of my mother in locating a place. The only place they could locate fast was a tiny, horrible studio apartment in the neighboring city, so they settled for it. Much as I had to do when I was 18. Really unusual. HM. Once I visited it with my mother, the place was horrible. The lone window pointed out toward a brick wall. The walls and carpet were a baby barf green hue. There was no dishwasher, the stove was the smallest I'd ever seen, and the toilet looked like it ought to be replaced. Thanks to thin walls, it wasn't especially silent inside either. 2 people were already loudly fighting in the apartment next door when we arrived. My mother did everything she could to give me depressing looks and indications that I should feel awful that I was pushing them to live in such a place, but I pretended I knew nothing until she stopped. They signed the lease straight away and moved in the little items they owned over the weekend. At last, they were leaving. Having been in my guest room for 5 months, they requested the queen-sized bed, dresser, and flat-screen TV. I told them to leave. I had grown to object to having them in the house. They didn't want anything else and seemed as though I was treating them like sick people. I changed the locks on every outdoor door as soon as they were permanently gone. Their everything was in the apartment. They spent their last night in my guest room. They spotted me beginning to remove the old lock on the front door as they climbed into the vehicle. I said nothing, and neither did they. They observed me for some time, though, until I replaced the old doorknob. They at last left after that. I let out a great sigh of relief when that van started down the road. That was, at last, their moment to simply go. You need not be concerned about me. For all I cared about, they could dwell beneath a rock. Not really. My family just heard from them. They contacted me to gloat that they had launched a new business in the same state as me that was just like their former one, and they are essentially on track to get their life back to how it was before the epidemic, which meant making a lot of money and downing other people. I already searched on Google for their new company. It seems to be doing really nicely. They feature everything and many excellent reviews. Right now, I have to admit I'm rather dang furious. I let them experience homelessness, and they squatted for months at my house for virtually nothing. They then returned to being the haughty, wine-loving corporate types they once were. It is taking far too long. Should justice be true, I would want to thank everyone for their useful advice. Many of the arguments stated regarding selling the house make sense. It's starting to show. Moving closer to my dad's parents, my good grandparents, would be great, they said. They advised me to sell the house straightforwardly if I wanted to. I'm really thinking about it now since people I know won't know where I am if I move away. I'll ask my manager whether I might be moved down south. Still, I wouldn't mind the hot weather anymore. Ever since I had to spend nights in a tent, I detest winter. I mostly live alone, hence right now I have few friends here. Starting anew someplace else would not be difficult. Though I'm not raised in this house, I do care about it and will be considering relocation. We definitely need more cameras, hence, I will investigate that. See here those who wish to know how my parents broke in and got away with it. Well, it's quite dumb. Extremely easy. They arrived through a window I neglected to lock. They popped it open and slid in from the screen. Then they grabbed copies of my additional house keys, which I hung on a hook close to the kitchen. My parents showed them working house keys and lied wildly about my letting them move in when they told the cops they were squatters and that we had a verbal arrangement. My parents had already altered their address with the DMV online before I even arrived home. Their new IDs with my address on them would be issued to me shortly, they assured the cops after showing them a printout of the form they had completed. The cops simply looked insane and advised me to file to have them kicked like any other regular person. It was a family concern. I wish I'd recorded their badge numbers down here, just to add this. Indeed, my parents did have their mail sent to my place. They also used to say they resided there, another thing. The truth is, should they have stayed in my house for longer than 30 days with permission, they would have been renters. They were there because they said I told them to be, and they employed every dirty technique in the book to persuade the officers of their veracity. They could not definitively, one way or another, determine how long my parents had resided there. Many began pointing fingers at one another, and the police were unsure whom to trust. I had to bring them before court to get them out of the house. While they were living with me, I wouldn't give my parents the Wi-Fi password either, since they neglected it. They did, however, get online since they created a mobile hotspot using their phones while squatting in my house. Those telling me I should post negative reviews or discuss my parents' past have no idea at all. I shall be sincere and forget about them. On the other side, if they lied to launch their new company, when it comes back on them, I'll get some popcorn as they were going to need assistance from someone. Should you reject the 30-day squatter's proposal, here is another. Should someone live on your land for more than 30 days with your approval, they become your tenants and can assert rights. This is a straight U.S. law applicable here. Usually, this will cause you to go through the eviction procedure. Even if permission wasn't sought for, there are still guidelines you have to follow should you violate them and reside in an empty house. About authorization and their length of stay in my place, they lied. This is the reason our disposal of them took 5 months. You now know. Update. Having 5 days now, I decided to investigate more. I spent 2 days inquiring of my family members about the beginning of my parents' new company. Quite rare is their new firm opening under less than 2 years following bankruptcy. For those believing it to be an MLM, the response is no. Not even my parents would do that. They most definitely believe MLMs are beneath them. Comparatively to the old company, the new one my parents are launching is also somewhat small. Regarding half the size, I would state they hired at least 2 persons prior. Right now, just they remain. Someone advised me to monitor my credit report should someone take my identity. I was not thinking about them since I initially had to cope with my parents residing in my house without permission. They understood it too. To be honest, though, I doubt they even gave my legal information from 10 years ago any thought. They could not even recall how to spell my first name. I did nonetheless guard my credit score. It has not shown any odd activity at all. At least they did not attempt to finance their company by pilfering my identity. The people who truly worry about me are my dad's side's good grandparents. They also don't know from where my parents acquired the funds to launch a new company. Since they informed my parents they did not want my dad's inheritance, they have contacted them a lot. Yet, they will not respond since they called a long time to boast about their recent success. It is obvious that following that, my dad's family did not provide any assistance to my parents. And regarding my mother's, I still had the old list of folks my parents told me to call. On the list also was the landline number of my biological grandmother. When I lacked a residence, I did try to give my mother and grandmother another call. She had no interest. Though I have never met them, my mom's parents resemble my parents really a lot. I suppose my dad did discover his true love in my mother. Already mentioned by someone else, they were meant to be together. I could reach out to my maternal grandmother once more. She had not only been apart from her spouse for a lengthy period, but also lost my maternal grandfather. Though I didn't know he passed 7 months ago. He left my mother also a sizable amount of money. They obtained the funds to begin running the business once more from there. They also made my maternal grandma sound really proud. She showed little genuine curiosity in discussing much else. Also. Probably the reason my parents contacted their grandparents to discuss their situation once again. My grandparents cut them off. Thus, they didn't want things to become better. Nevertheless, I don't care, and neither do my wonderful grandparents on my dad's side of the family. Everybody tells my folks to go kick rocks. They want nothing to have to do with them. Not just me. Many others whose parents have given up hope are also divorcees and alcoholic singletons who despise each other but act politely around one another abound on my mother's side of the family. Those on my dad's side are what I would define as decent and normal. Conversely, my dad wrecked a lot of relationships. When I was born, my grandparents were thrilled to be in my life, but for some reason, my parents kept me away from them. Why they did what they did eludes me. I believe this is because they wanted not to be judged on their parenting style. Better still if they had sent me to live with my grandparents or a private school. If they lack someone to criticize, narcissists are not truly happy either. You know nothing about what people have said about me behind my back over many years. My parents seem to have done to launch a new company. Not one thing illegal. Not much that one can document for the IRS or another. There is no restriction prohibiting starting your own business with money from an inheritance. My mom, like me, was an only child. She inherited everything, including her dad's house and acreage, upon his death. My parents currently reside there. My maternal granny sent me a picture. The house isn't very nice, but not horrible either. Like me, about the same. My parents most likely won't bother me until they have somewhere to live without paying for it. I want to sell my house and move. After selling my property, I either quit and search for a job in Arizona or I don't, since the firm I work for does not have an office there. I may also stay put and wish my parents never disturbed me. I'm thinking about looking for a job since I want my parents never to ever find me again. Should it prove impossible, I will not relocate. Still, I would much want to be able to what then would happen if I wished to sell the house fast. Purchasing more cameras for it is useless. I could as well install cameras both inside and outdoors, though, should I have to stay here and cannot find another employment in Arizona in the next 3 months. Many individuals have told me great things about where to place and what cameras to purchase. Though I don't think the same incident would ever happen again, I want my parents never to search for me once more for any reason. Whether they require assistance as elderly people, it makes no difference to me. For everything they gave, they got nothing in return. They are dead to me for all time. On my dad's side of the family, the members likewise agree. I will try everything to never turn out like my parents. Should I ever find myself a step-parent or parent? That is not fair for children. Story 2. It was a typical chilly evening in October when my world came crashing down. I was 30, just a month away from marrying Karen, the girl I'd loved since our junior year of high school. We'd been through everything together. Prom, graduation, the messy dorm life during college. And here we were, about to step into what I thought was the next and best chapter of our lives. The wedding plans were all set, the invites had been sent out, and excitement was in the air. Or so I thought. That evening I came home early from work, planning to surprise Karen with dinner at our favorite Italian place. I walked into what I expected to be a warm, loving home, but instead stepped into a cold ambush. My parents were there, which wasn't unusual by itself, but the tense atmosphere was thick enough to slice. Karen was on the couch, looking like she was on the verge of tears, and my brother Chris was nowhere to be seen, which was odd considering his car was parked outside. "Sit down, we need to talk," my mom said, her voice unusually stern. It was clear something was off, but nothing could have prepared me for what was coming. My dad just sat there looking down at his hands, not meeting my eyes. That alone sent alarm bells ringing through my head. Karen started talking, her voice shaky. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you this, and I never meant for it to happen." She trailed off, unable to finish her sentence. It was my mom who blurted out the rest. "Karen is pregnant." For a moment, my mind couldn't wrap around the words. Pregnant? But how? We'd been careful. We planned for this to happen after the wedding. That's when Chris walked in. His face was pale, his usual confident stride reduced to a shuffling gait. He wouldn't look at me either. The room felt suffocating as he positioned himself next to Karen, taking her hand in his. That gesture alone felt like a punch to the gut. "It's mine," Chris finally said, his voice barely a whisper but loud enough to shatter my world into pieces. "The baby is mine." The following hours were a blur. Karen and Chris explained how they had started seeing each other shortly after Karen and I got engaged. It began with small talk that turned into confessions of feelings that supposedly Chris had harbored since high school, feelings he chose that precise moment to act on, just days after our engagement party. Karen, caught up in the whirlwind of his confession, reciprocated, and their betrayal began. I remember looking at my parents for any sign of support, any indication that they saw how wrong this was. But while my dad seemed ashamed, my mom was almost defiant. She was quick to justify the whole mess, saying things like, "It's done now. What's important is the baby. They're in love, and you'll just have to accept it." Accept it? My fiancé? My brother? A baby on the way? It felt like a twisted joke, yet there was no laughter, only the sound of my heart breaking. The room spun as accusations and justifications flew around. Karen pleaded with me to understand, to see that her love for Chris was something she couldn't deny. Chris stood there mostly silent, letting the women do the talking, which was typical of him, always dodging the hard conversations. My mom's stance was clear. Chris was the golden child, and nothing he did could be wrong in her eyes, not even stealing his brother's fiancé. "They're going to be together and you're going to step aside," she stated coldly. The argument spiraled, voices raised, tears fell. And in the middle of that chaos, I felt a profound sense of isolation. It was clear where everyone's loyalties lay. The family I thought I had, the brother I had looked up to, the woman I loved, all choosing each other over me, over what was right and fair. The next few days were a storm of emotions. I moved out of the house Karen and I shared and into a small apartment. I took my essentials, a few clothes and the dog we had adopted together. Everything else didn't matter. The wedding was called off, and I told the few friends I trusted what had happened. Their outrage on my behalf was a small comfort, but it did little to soothe the raw wound of betrayal. As for my family, they rallied around Chris and Karen, supporting their new union as if it was something to celebrate. My dad tried to reach out a few times, his messages a mix of apologies and attempts to explain the unexplainable, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. The pain was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. And so I cut ties completely. I changed my number, blocked them on social media, and refused any attempts at reconciliation they made. They had made their choice, and I made mine. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but it was also the most freeing. No longer bound by the expectation to forgive and forget, I started to rebuild my life on my terms, without the shadow of my brother or the specter of Karen haunting me. That's how I ended up here, 5 years later, still piecing together my life, still wondering how it all went so wrong, but now with a call out of nowhere and a demand that was as outrageous as it was painful. The past was crashing back in, demanding attention I wasn't sure I was ready to give. 5 years is a long time. Long enough to move cities, start a new job, make new friends, and even begin to date again. I did all of that after the breakup, or rather, the explosion, of my previous life. I relocated from the small town where everyone knew everyone to a bustling city where nobody knew my name or my story. It was liberating and terrifying in equal measures. I found an apartment in a busy part of the city, small but mine alone, and filled it with new furniture and a lot of books. Anything to drown out the silence that my thoughts would otherwise fill. I got a job at a tech company, a role I'd never imagined for myself, but one that I grew to enjoy deeply. My colleagues were a diverse bunch, and soon enough I was spending weekends exploring city sights with them, trying out new cuisines and occasionally forgetting the past. Dating was trickier. Karen had been my first serious relationship, and the betrayal left me wary of trusting someone that deeply again. But life has a way of surprising you, and about a year after moving, I met Ella at a mutual friend's game night. She was vibrant, intelligent, and had a laugh that could light up a room. We started slow, and to her credit, Ella was patient. She knew bits and pieces of my past, enough to understand my hesitations, but not enough to scare her away, yet, as much as I built a new life. The old one had a way of creeping in during quiet moments. Nights were the hardest, when the city's noises died down and I was left alone with my thoughts. I would think of my family, wondering how they were, whether they ever spoke of me. I'd think of Chris and Karen, living the life that was supposed to be mine, raising a child that could have been mine in another life. It was a wound that had scabbed over but never fully healed. The only link I still had to my old life was through a couple of relatives who occasionally updated me on family affairs, carefully omitting any news about Chris and Karen. I knew my parents had fully embraced Karen into the family, throwing her a lavish baby shower, helping them move into a bigger house, everything to support their new life. My family had chosen their side unequivocally, and it seemed they were all happy. Or so I thought. Then, out of the blue came a call from my mother. Seeing her name flash on my phone after years of silence jolted me. I didn't answer. She tried a few more times before finally sending an email. "I need to talk to you urgently," it read. That was all. No apologies, no explanations, just a demand for my time, as if the past 5 years hadn't happened. Curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to know what could possibly be so urgent after all this time. Was it a family emergency? Illness? Something worse? Despite the swirling anger and hurt, concern for my family, however estranged, nagged at me. I called her back the next day, bracing myself for whatever it was. Her voice was shaky when she answered, soaked in tears. I hadn't expected that. "It's Chris," she managed to say between sobs. "He's been in an accident, a bad one." My heart sank. Despite everything, Chris was still my brother, the same brother I had looked up to as a kid, the one who taught me how to ride a bike, who defended me against bullies. The history we shared wasn't erased by his betrayal, though it had irreparably changed our relationship. "What happened?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "It was a hit and run. He's in a coma. And the doctors, they don't know if he'll wake up." Her voice broke on the last words, and I felt a pang of sympathy for her, for Chris, even for Karen. The news hit me harder than I expected. Part of me wanted to rush to the hospital, to be there as I would have in any other crisis before the betrayal. But another part of me held back, cautious and wounded from the scars of the past. "He's at St. Mary's," my mom continued. "I thought you should know. I think—" She hesitated. "I think it would mean a lot if you could come." I didn't commit to anything. "I'll think about it," was all I said before ending the call. The rest of the day was a blur. I went through the motions at work, met friends for drinks, and laughed at the right moments, but my mind was elsewhere. Sleep didn't come easily that night, nor on many nights following. The image of Chris, possibly lying lifeless in a hospital bed, haunted me. It was a stark reminder of how quickly life could change, how quickly you could lose someone. It brought back memories of our childhood, of our family before the rift. It made me question the resentment I'd harbored, wondering if it was worth holding on to if the worst were to happen. But there was also anger. Why now? Why reach out to me only in crisis? Was family only important when it was convenient? These questions churned in my mind unanswered, leaving me restless. Days turned into a week, and the urgency of the situation grew. The lack of information was maddening. Was he getting better? Worse? The same? I considered reaching out to my dad for more details, but hesitated. Last I knew, he sided with my mom, supporting Chris and Karen without a second thought for me. And then came another call. This time with a request so outrageous it cemented my feelings of alienation and hurt. My mom, through tears and desperate pleas, asked not just for my presence but for something far more significant. She wanted me to step up for Karen and the child if Chris didn't make it, to fill his shoes, to be the family they needed. I was floored. After years of silence, this was their ask. Not reconciliation, not healing, but substitution. The audacity of it left me speechless. Torn between the pull of old loyalties and the sting of fresh wounds, I was already pretty pissed off. and I did not want to ruin my mood while speaking to her even more, so I just hung up. And then I blocked her once more. I tried to go about my day as usual after that, but I just couldn't stop thinking about what Chris and Karen were going through, and I really felt bad for them. But I obviously was not going to do what my mother had asked me to do and take my brother's place in their family, because that was just weird. He was still around. He had just slipped into a coma, but it was not like he had passed away already, and she was acting like he was gone. I was feeling very iffy about this entire situation. So later that day, I decided to call my father instead, because I thought that he would be more reasonable than my mother. It was very awkward to speak to him after 5 years of no contact, but after some small talk, I asked him how Chris was doing, and he told me that things were not looking too good right now. And then I told him about the conversation that I had had with my mother earlier that day, and I expected him to have some reasonable insight, but instead he also said that my mother was right to expect that from me. That really took me by surprise because my dad was usually the more level-headed one out of both my parents, and now even he was saying such weird things. When I asked him if he really meant that, he told me that he did and said that Karen and I have had a history anyway, and I'm also part of the family no matter what our relationship for the past 5 years has been. Ultimately, I am blood, and if they can count on anybody to step up for the family, it should be me. And my mother's expectations are not exactly unreasonable. That really threw me for a curveball, and right now I honestly don't have any idea what to do. For the past week, I've been avoiding speaking to anybody from my family, even my other relatives, since I'm just afraid that somebody will bring this up with me, and then I'll be forced to explain my decisions. I also kind of feel like the bad guy here because I'm refusing to step up for my family, and I know that they really need me. If not financially, then at least emotionally. I just honestly have no clue what to do. And I know that what my mother is asking of me is really weird and unreasonable, but at the same time, I feel bad for rejecting it outright. I haven't even been down to the hospital to see my brother because I just feel so weird about this entire situation. Neither have I been able to speak to any of my friends about this, since all of this is so personal. They know how things have been between my family and me ever since my wedding got called off, but this is something a little stranger than that, honestly. And that's why, right now, I'm posting this here on Reddit, because I really think that I need some objective opinions about what I should do. If I visit my friends or family, everybody is going to have some sort of biased opinion. I really need advice because I think I'm going to lose my mind if I don't find an acceptable solution to all of this soon. I honestly feel like I'm going back to that phase of my life where I was constantly thinking about Karen and Chris, right after I found out that she had been cheating on me. And that was a really dark era, and I don't want to go back there since it has taken me a lot to snap out of it. So please, whatever anybody has to say, no matter how harsh the opinion might be, please just tell me so I can at least distract myself. So, am I the a-hole for refusing to go see my family and step up for them after my brother got into an accident?